And welcome back to an episode of the Cool Your Jets podcast. We host Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Michael, we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Obviously, we have our 53-man roster predictions. We're going to be talking about the waiver wire cut down and some positions the Jets could be looking to add talent. But first, we have to talk about what happened on Friday night. Miracle at the Meadowlands, Part 3. The Morgan Miracle. Captain Morgan rolling out, bringing the Jets on a massive comeback against the Philadelphia Eagles and getting the Hail Mary to Kenny Yeboah. I think that was maybe my favorite preseason moment of all time. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. And I have to be honest. I'm not saying I predicted it, but I had a weird feeling just by the flow of that game with all the crazy stuff that was
Yeah,
happening
okay. All
that
right.
he was going
Yeah.
to pull it off. No,
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. Sure you
I,
did.
in very, very deep in the back
What
of my
what were your
mind.
predictions again? What were your predictions again when I asked you?
I think I said a strip sack for Tanzel Smart
Yeah, a
and
20 yard.
Foley Fatukasi got one. So half credit, a defensive
No,
tackle got
doesn't
one.
count. Doesn't count. You had a 20-yard
Uh,
rushing touchdown. Didn't happen. I mean, I had a blocked punt. There was a punt that I thought was maybe tipped, but I don't think it was. But it was very close. So we
I
were
think
wrong
I
in all of it.
said, what was the other one I had? I
I don't
forget what it
know,
was.
but it was.
Yeah, I don't know, but I did get half
Here's
credit.
here's
I think
here's
I
what I do
deserve
know.
half credit for the strip
Not
sack.
at all. Not at all. Here's what I do know is that you didn't predict that James Morgan play because that was amazing. I mean, everybody was counting the Jets out, and like, look, it's preseason, so like, we're partially being funny. It doesn't really matter, but I do think it, from a team morale standpoint, I actually do think it kind of matters, and I like that it gives the Jets some momentum heading into the regular season. Um, it's a very, very small thing in the grand scheme of things. In fact, when we get to our 53-man rosters, I don't think either of us having Morgan or Yeboah making the final team. So it wasn't like it even had him, making the final roster. But I like it from a team chemistry point of view that it's like, they went undefeated in the preseason, 2 impressive games. I mean, look, outside of the injuries, and I tweeted this out, I don't think this preseason could have gone much better. I mean, look, the
Yeah,
injuries are, when you're talking about preseason, that's like one of the biggest things. It's player development and no injuries. And obviously the Jets didn't get one of those things. But I thought from the development of Zach Wilson to the development of a few other players, the fact that the Jets looked well coached, which you can tell that in preseason, they looked like a functioning team. They didn't have a single game where they just looked like they didn't belong in the field. And that has not always been the case in these preseason games. And yeah, I like that they have some momentum heading into the regular season. What were some of your takeaways from Friday night? Did anybody do enough to make your 53-man roster, to like push their way onto the roster, were things pretty much set in stone?
well, I think the guy who probably generated the most hype in terms of potentially doing that is obviously Kenny Yeboah with 2 touchdowns, 4 catches, 100 yards, and of course one of those was the Hail Mary. But I think, and people were sort of disagreeing with me a little bit, but I just don't feel like that was enough to push him onto the roster because I think, with anything in football, you never want to overreact to one game too much. And I think prior to this game, there wasn't really much of an argument at all. He didn't do anything the first 2 games. He had 2 catches for 6 yards, and one of them he fumbled. And he hasn't been doing too well in practice either. He hasn't even pushed for first team reps at all, really. And apparently has had a lot of reports of drops. I believe so, quite a few throughout camp. So I don't think this one performance really was enough to push him onto the roster. Practice squad for sure.
Yeah.
And I could see the argument if you want to put him on. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it at all. Just for me personally, I don't think so. If they do, because this is going to be a 21, 12 personnel heavy team. So if they do want to keep him over Ryan Griffin, 3 tight ends plus Wesco, I could see that. I just don't think so. And I think a big part of that is the fact that, aside from the Hail Mary, which was great, the rest of his production was, he did what he was supposed to do, but it wasn't necessarily translatable, maintainable stuff. The touchdown was wide open, just like a lot of his college production. And the catch before that was pretty good, but he didn't really win the route. So, and, route running is a huge part of being consistent as a pass catching performer, whether you're a tight end or a receiver. And he didn't really show too much of that.
Right.
And we know blocking isn't really his strong suit either. So, definitely a good practice squad candidate, but I don't think he pushed himself onto the roster. And same thing for Morgan, who the moment was great. It was fun, but he also threw a lot of duds throughout this game. A lot, even into the Packers game, he misses way too many easy throws in the flat, just rolling out, and that doesn't fly in this offense. You got to be able to hit those easy throws in stride to give guys good chances to make plays after the catch. And his accuracy is really erratic. It's some of the most, we've seen a lot of bad quarterbacks with the Jets, and his accuracy is up there in terms of shakiness. So other than that, though, I don't know if anyone really earned. Well, the one guy who I think did make a strong case is Josh Adams, because he had the type of game that is, legitimately impressive in terms of the consistency of how he performed. It wasn't like he made one big play that caught everyone's eyes. No, he was dominating just play after play, 8 yards, 7 yards, 9 yards, carry after carry. He averaged over 5 yards an attempt, and his longest run was 9 yards. So that just goes to show how consistent he was. So I think Josh Adams created a conversation for the fourth running back spot against Pirine. But other than that, I think they're probably I think one guy played himself off. I think Isaiah Dunn kind of sealed the deal in terms of his making the roster. He struggled against the Packers. Then this game, it continued. They have a lot of guys competing for spots at cornerback. And I think with his struggles, he might have played himself out.
Yeah, I think, well, there's a lot you just brought up there. I think this is going to be an uneven team in the sense that I think they're deep at some positions and they're going to go really heavy. And then other positions, they might go pretty light. And that's just like, there's a dearth of talent at certain spots. And you don't want to keep too many guys. I think the tight end's a perfect example. It's like, yeah, the Jets could maybe try to keep 5 tight ends if you're including Wesco. It is a heavy tight end offense. The 49ers have kept a lot of tight ends. But if you do that, are you going to cut a guy at the receiver spot where it's like, I think the Jets have a very talented, or I should say, I think they have a very talented receiver room, but I think in particular, they have a very deep receiver room, and they're going to cut at least one good player there. Between the two Smiths and Berrios, it could be 2 good players. And it's like, so if you're going to go heavy at a spot just to, maybe to keep developing a guy on the active roster, you're going to be letting go of a good player at some spots. I think the Josh Adams thing is you and I both love Josh Adams. I think he is a good fit in this offense, but I mean, Pirine has been a shoo-in over him the entire offseason. I mean, I don't think Adams has had really any meaningful reps since the spring. I mean, we just haven't heard his name that much at all. I mean, he's played a little bit at the end of preseason games, but like you said, I mean, every time he gets the ball, he's impressed. And it's like Pirine must be having some damn good practices to be a shoo-in over Josh Adams, because in games, Pirine has not shown that much, and Adams has at least shown that he's a competent back. I mean, hell, him and Johnston combined for like 200 yards at the end of last season. But I think, Pirine is the draft pick, and if he's been performing well in practice, I think they will stick with him. But they could try to stash Adams in the practice squad, which I think makes sense, because if any of those running backs go down, I think he's the first guy they should call. I think the one guy who I think should have made his way onto the initial 53-man roster, I don't know if he does, and I don't think it even matters in the long haul, but Josh Johnston. Because I thought out of all the non-Wilson quarterbacks, he definitely looks the most in control, in command. He would be the guy that I'd be most comfortable out of Morgan, White, and him to run the offense if, God forbid, Zach Wilson were to go down. But like a guy like Adams, it's like he didn't get any reps for the most part all training camp. White has gotten virtually all the second team reps with Morgan sprinkled in. So I just don't think they'll make a, knee-jerk reaction to that game, which he was good, but he wasn't otherworldly. I think he was good enough to make a strong case, because I don't think White has done enough, but White is, I guess, younger, and maybe they want to try to develop him. And Johnson is probably not going to get claimed once you cut him. So, you can always call him back if something were to happen. But the reason I think it's a moot point anyways is that I think the Jets do end up adding somebody there. So whether White, Johnson, or Morgan makes the initial 53, I don't think that's the guy who's going to be the Jets' backup quarterback. And we'll talk about that a little later in the podcast. Michael, I guess we should just hop right into our 53-man rosters, because I think we're probably going to agree for the most part. I think the one thing that's going to be interesting about this is that this will not be the roster that the Jets take the field with against Carolina. Oh, you know what? I'm completely forgetting before we get into the 53-man roster, there was a big trade today that we were obviously going to talk about at some point, but the Shaq Lawson trade, trying to bring in somebody at that edge spot to not going to replace Carl Lawson, but can certainly replace Vinny Curry and could most likely at some point during the season be playing starting reps. Mike, what was your reaction to the Shaq Lawson trade? I'm going to try my best to not keep switching Carl Lawson and Shaq Lawson because I can already see it coming. But what was your reaction to the Shaq Lawson trade? And the compensation the Jets gave up.
Yeah, I absolutely love this trade. And this is exactly what, once those injuries came through, once Vinny Curry was out for the season, in addition to Lawson, this is the exact kind of trade that I had in mind for them to make. Not necessarily giving up a first round pick, second round pick, whatever, for Chandler Jones, some splash move like that. More so, see what you can get with a late round pick. See if you can get a guy who could help your team right now and also maybe stick around in the future. And Shaq Lawson can be that with his contract structure. He's going to have a cap hit of, I believe, just under 1 million this year. And then next year, his cap, he has over about 10.8 million, but the Texans are going to eat about half of that. So he's only going to be about 5 million. So you have him for 2 years. And if he plays well, maybe that's the second edge rusher you're going to need next year. So not only is he an upgrade right now, but maybe you knocked out a starting spot you're going to have to fill next year just with a 6th round pick and very limited cap space. And then in terms of on the field, I like the move because he's a good player. His production has been very solid the past 2 years, and he does it in both phases. His run defense has been considered above average, and his pass rushing in terms of pressures and pass rush wins is consistently above the last 2 years. He broke out, was above the 70th percentile as well. So he's a good starter. I think that's a difference between him and Vinny Curry. Curry is a very situational player. He's a guy who, with the Eagles the past couple seasons, was 30%, 40% of snaps. And then with the Jets this year, he probably would be kicking that up, which probably wouldn't be ideal. You'd probably see a dip in his production because he's up there in age and, he'd be taking on more snaps. But Shaq Lawson can play a starter's role for you, like he did for the Dolphins last year. He averaged about 64% of their snaps last year. So he is capable of starting for you at that right defensive end spot. And I think that's where he will slide in, right where Carl Lawson was going to be, because he is, like Carl Lawson, a right side dominant player, over 90% of his snaps on that side last year. So I think he'll step right in at that spot. So there's a lot to like about this move. In terms of the risk, I think there would have been more if the Texans weren't taking on so much of the money, because, if you had to pay him his entire nearly $11 million next year, that's significant. He has a lot to live up to if you're taking that on, even if you're only giving up a 6th round pick. But with the Texans taking all that money on, it definitely significantly lowers the risk. But so I like this move a lot. This is a great move.
Yeah, I think that, I don't think the Texans would have taken that money on if they weren't going to cut him. I think that's the reason. And I think that is something to factor in here because I love the trade. Let's just get that out of the way. I think this is the exact type of move, like you said, that they had to make. I love that they essentially just traded Jordan Willis for Shaq Lawson.
Right. Yeah.
And Lawson is, like I said, I think in some ways I like him a lot more than Vinny Curry because he is younger. You can plug him in here next year. I like him in that rotational role. I'm not ready to say that he's going to be the guy that could potentially be starting opposite Lawson next year. I mean, obviously he needs to show it this season. I do love that in this Robert Saleh defense, you do see defensive linemen playing maybe above their average performances, just because it is a very attack centric defense for those linemen. I mean, they don't have to worry about reading gaps or anything like that. And so I think Lawson fully gets to be unleashed with his hand in the dirt. I am curious why the Texans were so willing to let him go, though. I don't think, you want to look at it both sides of things. There is a reason, you said this with Morgan Moses. It's like, there is a reason he's getting released. There are negatives, and it's not just a money thing, or else they wouldn't have traded for him a few months ago. He clearly did not have a good training camp. He was playing deep into the preseason games and wasn't doing much. And maybe it's a scheme fit thing. Who knows? But I like him, and I like him to replace Vinny Curry. I still think the Jets could look up at adding other edge rushers during the waiver wire cut down period and adding guys from maybe another team. But I love what he fills for this year. I love maybe the depth that he provides next year. But he's not Carl Lawson. Let's just put it like that. I'm not saying you're saying that, but he has to prove that he can be a starting player on this defense before I'm willing to say, okay, maybe we look at 2022 and he could maybe be starting opposite Carl.
Yeah, in terms of why they might value him so little, he did have to be fair, a pretty bad preseason. He played a lot, like you said, and I believe 50 pass rush snaps, and he had 0 pressures. So he did have a really bad preseason objectively, which is concerning. But at the end of the day, it is. And of course, now we're saying this because he played bad, but Zach Wilson's going to the Hall of Fame based on his preseason. But it is only like 2 games worth of snaps, so it's not the end of the world.
Right.
And
but
it's worth noting.
Well, and it's like it is against, by and large, I don't want to call them scrubs, but it is against lesser talent, than they need to be playing in the regular season. It should be kind of concerning. It's like, why aren't you winning your one-on-ones? That is a position where you kind of can judge. You either won the rep or you lost the rep. I mean, it's pretty simple. Right. It's not like a guy, a quarterback, and you don't really. I mean, look, like we said, there might be some scheme issues there. They might be asking him to do some things that he's not necessarily comfortable with. I do think you'll see him perform better under Robert Saleh than you were seeing him in Houston, because he's just going to be able to focus on getting after it. And I love the trade. This is the exact type of move they had to make, but I'm not willing to anoint him any type of savior. And I don't even know if he starts week 1 after this trade. I think maybe they do start Huff or Blair, or try to ease him in a little bit. So I'm not willing to do a victory lap just yet. I love, from a management perspective, I love the move. I love the type of risk versus reward, but I'll wait and see what type of player the Jets are getting in Shaq Lawson. All right, let's talk about the 53-man roster. I'm sure we'll circle back to that edge spot. I think as I was about to say earlier, is that this is not going to be the roster that the Jets take the field with against Carolina. I do think they add a lot of guys next week from other teams. Joe Douglas loves to use any sort of avenue to improve this team. You go back to 2019, the Jets added 4 guys, 3 of which were on the team. I mean, Bennett Jackson, I think, just got cut to make room for Shaq Lawson, but Braxton Berrios and John Franklin Myers are both probably going to make the final roster. So those are long-term guys for the Jets. I mean, those signings can matter. I think last year, with no preseason, there wasn't really a good way to evaluate. But I think with a full preseason, or at least a 3-game preseason, Joe Douglas and his pro personnel staff has had plenty of tape to find maybe some guys that they do like. Obviously, the backup quarterback spot, as we were talking about earlier, is a prime position to look at. Because there are a lot of teams that have 3 quarterbacks, and not a lot of teams are going to keep 3 quarterbacks. Michael, over under, we'll say 2.5. I think we did this before, but as we get into the official cut down week, over under 2.5 guys they add from other teams next week.
I think that's a really good place to put it. I think right around there is where it will be. I'm going to go under. I feel like it'll be 2. I think we'll see an interior offensive lineman and a linebacker. I think that's the 2 that we'll get.
So no quarterback.
I could see that. Yeah, I feel like they're just going to roll with White, because I feel like, and I understand, I know that you think that they will pick one up, and there are good options, a few which you brought up to me, which I'm sure you'll bring up here. But I feel like the same thing kind of applies to where, if you're not going to go with Josh Johnson because he hasn't gotten reps and Mike White has been getting reps, I feel like that kind of applies to a free agent quarterback too, unless you're getting a very seasoned veteran, which there are a couple that could be available. So that's just kind of my take on it, but I could absolutely see them picking up a quarterback, but I'm going to go with under and say that it'll be 1 offensive lineman and on the interior, although it could be a tackle too, with Connor McDermott and Chuma Edoga injured, but I'll say 1 lineman, 1 linebacker.
Maybe a guard tackle combo, especially since Feeney can, play both guard and center, albeit at maybe a low level. I think that there are, probably 5 positions I would keep an eye out for the Jets potentially adding. I think quarterback is one of them. I think tight end is one of them. I think the interior offensive line is one of them. The edge spot, if somebody else shakes free, I could see them adding another body there. And I think the linebacker spot is another one. So I think it's going to be over. I do think they had 3 guys. I do think they had a backup quarterback. I say they add an interior offensive lineman like you, and then I'll go linebacker here. I think that's kind of a deep position among other NFL teams, and I could see somebody else shaking free and the Jets adding somebody. But tight end and edge also, I could very well see the Jets adding somebody there. But let's just hop right into, as far as backup quarterbacks, I mean, obviously Nick Foles is the best option as far as seasoned veterans who you can win with. Hell, Joe Douglas won his only Super Bowl, not his only Super Bowl, but his Super Bowl with the Eagles from Nick Foles. Obviously, Kyle Allen is another guy who could potentially get cut by the Washington football team. Kurt Benkert is a guy on the Packers who's their third quarterback, had a great game against the Jets and practiced against the Jets all week. So maybe they liked what they saw there. And he's also a guy who's running a very similar offense, which is something that seems to matter a lot to this team. That has kind of been Robert Saleh's reasoning. So I know you're not a huge Benkert fan, but that is a potential signing. I think he's maybe an upgrade over White.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one that you bring up because of the scheme fit connection.
I think Brian Hoyer is a guy that they were reportedly very interested in before the Patriots signed him. And I don't think, unless the Patriots keep 3, they already have Mac Jones, Cam Newton. They also have Jarrett Stidham. I think he's probably a guy who gets cut. So there's a lot of guys that could shake free here. And I think the Jets do have one of them. I mean, obviously Foles is the best case scenario here. But I'm not willing to say, I don't think it's going to be White or Johnston. That's maybe my bold prediction, but I guess that's just a good segue into the 53-man roster. Because if we talk about the quarterbacks, I believe we have it the same. Or, maybe I shouldn't assume that. I haven't seen yours. You haven't seen mine. We're just going to go through the positions. We tend to, great minds think alike. Let's just be honest here, Michael. We probably will have a good amount of overlap here, but at quarterback, I have Zach Wilson and Mike White. What about you?
Yep. I have the same. I think that's what they'll do, and try to put Morgan on the practice squad.
Yeah, I definitely look, if it were me, I would probably go White and Johnson and, maybe stash both White and Morgan on the practice squad and maybe try to add somebody. And if you can find somebody, then you can cut Johnson. But they gave White pretty much all the second team reps all off season. It just doesn't seem like Johnson's one good half of a, meaningless preseason game is going to be enough. At running back.
Actually, before we move on with quarterback, what do you think about the idea of maybe putting Johnson on the practice squad and having him as that? Because now you have the ability carrying over from the new rule last year to where you could elevate 2 players from the practice squad each week. Maybe have him there as an emergency option. If you keep Morgan as well, you could still have him as that veteran presence. Will still be in practices. Do you think maybe that's something they could do?
They will definitely have a third quarterback on that practice squad, especially with all the COVID regulations and whatnot. Because I think the Jets are going to add somebody else, I don't think it's going to be Johnson, because I think it's going to be Wilson, a vet, and then on the practice squad, you're going to have probably Morgan and White. I think, White has definitely shown more than Morgan, but because Morgan was a draft pick by this general manager, I think they hang on to him for at least another offseason. Look, if they really do continue with Wilson and White, I could see it. I think it certainly makes sense. But with all the COVID regulations, it makes a lot. In general, it just makes a lot of sense to have a third option there. It'll probably be one of the young guys. And look, that Morgan pick definitely deserves a lot of the. It got criticized heavily at the time, and it certainly has not proved us wrong. We've talked about this, how the only sort of positive spin you can put on it is that it seems like Joe Douglas's his scouting department does put a heavy emphasis on the coaching staff and trying to have, one shared vision and working alongside him to try to find the best players. And, that 2020 class was a group of guys who were drafted for Adam Gase and Greg Williams. So look, I don't think I certainly don't think if James Morgan was with Adam Gase, he'd be much better. In fact, he'd probably be much worse, but it is worth noting that maybe he was an Adam Gase pick. At least that's, it's not, doesn't work like that. Joe Douglas still deserves plenty of criticism, but that's the only sort of rationalization we can make about that pick.
And one more point in the quarterbacks. You brought it up briefly, but I think an important factor in this is the COVID aspect of it. I feel like the Broncos situation last year could scare a lot of teams into going 3 quarterbacks, more teams into going 3 quarterbacks, just to avoid that disaster scenario of, potentially losing all your quarterbacks or losing enough quarterbacks where you don't actually have one. So I feel like that maybe will prompt more teams to keep more quarterbacks.
Yeah, 3 or 4. I think the thing with Johnson is you don't really have to worry about him. Look, I don't think you have to worry about this with any of the Jets backup quarterbacks, but you don't have to worry about him getting claimed once you cut him. I could certainly see a team maybe adding him in the middle of the season. That's kind of been the MO his entire career. But he's a guy that you can kind of just, all right, save his number. If disaster strikes, he's a guy you can call up and sign. But look, I think it is certainly a possibility that the Jets could put 2 quarterbacks in that practice squad, one being Josh Johnson. Looking at the running backs, I think we're probably going to be similar here. This one seems like it's been a no-brainer all training camp, but Michael Carter, Ty Johnson, Tevin Coleman, and the Michael Pirine. I think I'd love to stick Josh Adams here, but I'm doing what I think the Jets will do, not what I would do. I think they'll probably try to stash Adams on the practice squad. But those four seem to be locks.
Yeah, I agree. I have the same four, and same as you. I would, if I were running this team, I would probably keep Josh Adams because I think there's nothing, absolutely nothing he's done between the end of last year and this preseason. And we haven't watched practice, and that does matter. It's significantly more reps than what we see in preseason. But at least on the field and real games, there's nothing he's done to not deserve a roster spot. I think he should be on, would make any NFL roster the way he's played. So I would keep him, but Pirine second year. And I think Pirine has improved a little bit.
Yes.
Josh Adams has outplayed him, but from what we've seen, from what I saw, the couple of practices I went to, and from the short amount of time he's played in the preseason, I thought he did a pretty good job in those, chew the clock situations, short yardage. I think he's improved a little bit,
Right.
even though Josh Adams is, still significantly outplaying him. So I think the Adams, advocating for him, for me, is not necessarily knocking Pirine as much as I was last year, because last year I think he was struggling more than he has in the little he's played this year. But I still would keep Adams over him, but I think Pirine has done enough to warrant being kept going into his second year as a fourth round pick of this GM.
Yeah, the other thing is I think that when you have a running back by committee, you kind of want each running back to be able to do something different. You mentioned
Right.
Pirine is going to be the Jets' power back, their short yardage guy. Tevin Coleman is the Jets' receiving back. You're going to see him on third downs and flexed out at wide receiver. Ty Johnston seems to be that every down bell cow type of back. And Carter is obviously the rookie, but he seems to be the speedster, the jitterbug, the guy that is very shifty. And it's like, where does Adams fit in there? I mean, I think, he's a bigger back in the sense that he's a tall back, but he's maybe not as physical as Pirine. Although you did see it on that 2-point conversion. I mean, David Moore blew his block and Adams still found a way to get to the end zone. So he's probably more of your, I think maybe on the onset of the offseason, the conversation was Ty Johnson or Josh Adams there, just because those were maybe the two that you could cut one and add the other just based off the role. But it seems like Ty Johnson ran away with that. You're obviously not going to cut Carter. Coleman, if he didn't have ties to the coaching staff, I could maybe see that just because he's a little older, but he does something completely different than Josh Adams, so it doesn't really make sense. And the same thing with Pirine. They're both different running backs. So I think those four make it, and I think Adams sticks in the practice squad. At tight end, we'll throw a fullback in here. Obviously, Wesco is going to make it as a fullback, but at tight end, fullback, four guys, including Wesco, but at tight end, Herndon, Croft, and Griffin. For me, I do think they keep. There is some thought that they could maybe cut Griffin and just roll with Wesco, Herndon, and Croft, but just because this offense is so tight end heavy, and inevitably, especially a guy like Croft who's battled injuries, his entire career. Honestly, same with Herndon. Guys are going to go down. You want to have depth there, depth even in game, but throughout the season. So as I said, I think this is definitely a position I can see the Jets adding somebody. But right now I'll say those four. What about you?
I'm different than you here. I'm going with only three here: Croft, Herndon, and Wesco. And I don't feel great about it because of the fact that this is, and we've seen it in the preseason. I mean, we talked about it before the preseason, but it was validated with how they played. We're going to see a lot of 12 and 21 personnel. Wesco is playing a lot. Consistently there were two tight ends, considering Wesco a tight end, even if he was lining up at fullback, two of these guys on the field. And, running with only three is a little bit risky from a depth perspective. But, one of these roster spots, which we'll talk about later, is going to go to Jared Davis, who's going to go on injured reserve, and another one's going to open up. So then maybe that is where they add someone who gets cut. Maybe Ryan Griffin comes in after that. But for now, and this is mainly just to have an extra spot at a couple of other positions where they're really deep, I'm going to go with just the three here.
I think maybe initially I could see them doing that. I just don't see them rolling into the season with less than four tight ends. I mean,
yeah, you're probably right.
Just based off the style of offense. But, it'll be really interesting to see what Joe Douglas values here. Is he going to value more the long-term building of the team where it's like, okay, we're going to be really light at some positions because we want to keep developing some guys at other positions? Does he value more of like, I think a good example is on the defensive line with guys like Jonathan Marshall and Tanzel Smart that we're going to get to. Like those are guys who could end up being very good players, showed flashes throughout preseason, but right now it's like, are they even going to be active guys on game day? maybe you should value, keeping another tight end, but it's like, are you cutting a, better player to keep a worse player just to fill a need? I think that's going to be really interesting to see how Douglas kind of handles that debate. And I think, another position group where that's going to be evident is the offensive line. And you and I both think they're going to add somebody in the interior, but at least on the onset, obviously the starting five between Becton, Vera-Tucker, McGovern, Van Roten, and, it hasn't really been declared Moses or Fant. It'll probably be Moses. Obviously Fant or Moses will be the sixth offensive lineman, the swing tackle, but those six are shoo-ins. And after that, the Jets' depth here is awful. I mean, let's just be honest. It's bad. It's not good. And that could be something that comes back to bite him. Obviously, Alex Lewis's retirement didn't help. Cameron Clark getting injured didn't help. Connor McDermott getting injured didn't help. Dan Feeney having a bad preseason doesn't help. But I think he's definitely a lock, just, considering he was playing first team reps all offseason. Those are the locks, is what I would say. And I think Levin makes the initial 53 as well. But he's a guy that could potentially get cut, or they could add somebody else and keep Levin. But so for me, I'll have 8 offensive linemen.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with you here. I've just 8 to start out with the obvious starting 5 plus Fant, Corey Levin, and Dan Feeney. But that's weak for sure. And they need some help there because I mean, at tackle, having George Fant as your backup or Moses, we'll see how it pans out. That's fantastic. Not a lot of teams have a better swing tackle than that. But the rest of that, not having another tackle, and then Feeney has been a bad starter the past few years and had a really bad. I mean, to be fair to Feeney, he was really bad against the Giants, but he kind of bounced back the next 2 games. But that first game, he showed you how low his floor can be. Corey Levin struggled for the most part too. So no one's backup offensive line is really good. Like, oh, we feel great if one of our starters gets injured, but there's still a spectrum. I think the Jets were kind of on track with Lewis and some of their other pieces. Clark, if he developed, to having an offensive backup line where it was like, okay, maybe the drop off won't be too big if someone gets hurt. But now it's starting to look like if there's an injury other than at tackle, if there's an injury on the interior offensive line, that you could be in pretty big trouble. So I think they will add someone here for sure.
Yeah, I think there are good backup offensive lines. I think, but like you said, it would be like having a vet like an Alex Lewis who started and been mediocre at this point, not a starting player, and then maybe a young guy, a day 3 pick or something like that, who is sitting behind a current veteran. And I think, a situation like that, exactly pretty much similar to what you were saying with Lewis and Clark would make you feel a lot better. But it's like Feeney and Levin is just not inspiring. So I definitely think this is a position the Jets look at. And look, that's Joe Douglas's MO is finding offensive linemen. We've seen him do it a lot. I think Moore was a guy who they added a few weeks ago. He was a hotly contested guy on the waiver wire. He is not really impressed. I think maybe they try to stick him on the practice squad to keep developing, unless he doesn't clear waivers, but he did not show enough to make the roster. But I definitely think this is where Joe Douglas is certainly going to add somebody because they need help here. It's in his blood. So makes a lot of sense there. So that is the one position I definitely don't think stays the same. When you look at receiver, this is a really interesting one. I've seen all sorts of different takes. I think initially we thought the Jets were only going to keep 6 receivers between Elijah Moore, Denzel Mims, Corey Davis, Keelan Cole, Jamison Crowder. And then I think we pretty much all assumed it was going to be Braxton Berrios. But now it's like, both Smiths between Vincent and Jeff have both played pretty well. Other receivers have played well, but it seems like those between Berrios and the Smiths are the 3 that are kind of fighting for either 1 or 2 roster spots. I'm going to say that the Jets keep 7. And Vincent and Braxton Berrios are the 2 that make it. And I think they cut Jeff Smith. But I really like Jeff Smith. I just think I've gone back and forth on this. I just think that maybe Vincent Smith is the more complete receiver. Maybe they go with both Smiths and cut Berrios. I really don't know. But I think the safest bet is 7, and it's Berrios and Vincent Smith. What about you, Michael?
Yeah, I'm with you on this one. And it's definitely interesting because for a 12 and 11 or 12-21 personnel team, keeping 7 wide receivers doesn't necessarily align with that. But like you said earlier, the big question is how is Douglas going to balance, filling needs in terms of keeping more tight ends, keeping more interior linemen versus where the talent on the team is, because the strength of this roster, wide receiver is maybe the strongest other than defensive tackle, probably the second strongest position. on this team. So even if it's not the biggest need in terms of how you run your offense, there's still a lot of talent there. And if you're cutting Vincent Smith, cutting Braxton Berrios, even Jeff Smith, the guy who's making the team instead of him at another position probably isn't as good. So that's going to be the big dilemma. But I think here, it definitely, and I also think there's something to be said, even if you're not a heavy 11 personnel team, which they're not, that, the primary point of the season is developing your franchise quarterback. So having as much depth as you can at wide receiver is very helpful for him. You don't want a Darnold in Chicago situation. And I don't think they're going to get that with this wide receiver unit. So I agree with you. I'm going to go 7 deep with Berrios, Vincent Smith, then Denzel Mims, Keelan Cole, Jameson Crowder, Corey Davis, and Elijah Moore.
Yeah, what helps Vincent Smith a lot, and I think what kind of broke the tie was he's been a good special teamer as well, and I think that's where it really matters at the end of the when you get to these cut downs is can they contribute on special teams? Because honestly, that's where a lot of these guys are going to be. The guys that we're deciding do we cut them or keep them. A lot of those guys just be playing on special teams for the most part. Maybe they play as the season goes on and injuries happen, but on the onset, their role is going to be on special teams, and I think they'll be. Vincent Smith is the guy, and Braxton Berrios for that matter, are two guys they'll be comfortable with on special teams.
Yeah, I think that's really what puts Vincent Smith in. Both those guys, because Berrios has been very solid as a punt returner. Vincent Smith, I think, can return kickoffs. I don't know if he will. They've been trying a lot of guys out there, but it's not just kickoffs. If you remember the awesome downed punt he had at the 1 yard line with Braden Mann, he brings speed in that aspect as well. And also, I think what puts him in for me over Jeff Smith, and this depends on what the Jets value, because I could see Jeff Smith over Vincent depending on what the Jets want. I think Jeff Smith is a better short area quickness type athlete who can run gadget plays with, throw screen passes to, whereas Vincent Smith is more of a straight line speed athlete, which is why he's on the punt team, why he returns kickoffs, where it's not necessarily quickness and change of direction, but get him in a straight line and he'll pick up, and you can run end arounds with him. He can be a deep threat like that, but he was a consistent wide receiver. I think he led the team in first down receptions. He had 6, and he had at least 1 in every game. So he was consistent in that area, and it was short stuff, slants, little curls, stuff like that. So I think he looked polished in that area as well, and that helps him out. I think Vincent Smith made a really strong case with his impact in a lot of different areas.
Yeah, I think they stash Jeff Smith on the practice squad, but it wouldn't be the most shocking thing to me if they cut Berrios and keep Jeff Smith and Vincent Smith, because I think that he's probably more versatile than Berrios. But the other thing is, hell, maybe they pull another trade out of the hat and they trade Jameson Crowder. I don't know if I would do that, but this is a really interesting position to watch over the next few days. But I'm right now, I'll stick with Vincent and Berrios, but Jeff Smith is certainly a guy to keep an eye out for. When we look at the defensive line, let's start with the edge. John Franklin Myers, Ronnie Blair, Bryce Huff, and Shaq Lawson is all I'm keeping there. Are you going to go with those 4, or are you going to add somebody else?
I'm going to go with. So what was your group? Remind me again.
I had John Franklin Myers, Ronnie Blair, Bryce Huff, and Shaq Lawson.
Yeah, I have the same one. So obviously that means Jabari Zuniga getting cut. I had him before they trade for Lawson. I had him making the team, but with Lawson here now, I just don't think he's done enough to warrant a roster spot with how many tough decisions they have to make. It is early in his career, but you got to do something at some point, and he hasn't done anything in the limited time he played last year. And in this preseason, just no special flashes to really hang your hat on. Yeah, so I think he'll be a practice squad candidate, but you got to show more than he has.
Yeah, and he's just battled injuries. I mean, he just hasn't been healthy either. So yeah, I think he's a practice squad guy. I don't think you have to worry about anybody claiming him unless they loved him in the draft or something. I mean, look, so guys do get claimed here just based on their draft pedigree. So he is kind of one of those guys that could get cut and added somewhere. That wouldn't be the most surprising thing in the world, I guess. So I shouldn't say that he's a shoo-in to make the practice squad, but if he clears waivers, I think he's definitely a good practice squad candidate. When you go to the interior, and like you said, I think this is the strength of the unit of the team. So maybe they go a little deeper here. I'm going to have them keeping 4, but I would not be surprised if they go 5 or 6 here. I'm going to have Foley Fatukasi, Quinnen Williams, Nathan Shepard, and Sheldon Rankins. And obviously the 2 guys that have made a strong case to make it would be Jonathan Marshall, a draft pick. So that certainly gives him some more weight, and Tanzel Smart, both of whom I put on the practice squad in my, fantasy roster. But I think of the initial 53-man roster, those are going to be the 4 defensive tackles. What about you, Michael?
I have you have 5, right? With
4.
Shepard, 4. So you only have Quinnen, Rankins, Fatukasi, Shepard.
Have you been listening?
I'm listening. I'm just trying to get the numbers down.
All right.
Remind me your group again.
Foley Fatukasi, Nathan Shepard, Quinnen Williams, Sheldon Rankins.
Okay, so you only have 4.
Yes, I only have 4. How is this?
I'm good at counting.
Aren't you the numbers guy on this podcast? Yes, 4 defensive tackles. I think I've said 4 defensive tackles now 6 times. So do that math.
Okay, so you have
don't. All right,
4 times 6.
The bit is over. The bit is over. Who do you have at defensive tackle?
Okay, so I'm actually much different than you here. I have 5, and I have 2 guys who you don't have making it, and I have one of your guys off the roster. So obviously the big 3 is on the team: Quinnen, Rankins, Fatukasi. Beyond that, though, I have Jonathan Marshall and Tanzel Smart, with Nathan Shepard getting the axe. For me, my reasoning with that is this is just my opinion. That's wrong. That's what any of this is. There's no right or wrong. I mean, I know with your 5 defensive tackles, it's a little bit different than mine. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, Jesus, oh my God.
All right, so I think Marshall just brings a very similar skill set to Shepard, and he has the draft pick advantage being much younger. Nathan Shepard is 28. I think
that's pretty crazy.
Something that is definitely worth taking into account here. You would think he's a younger player. He's from 27. He's going to be 28 in October.
Okay, so so Shaq Lawson is 27 too, right?
Yeah.
So there's funny quick thing about Shaq Lawson before that thought leaves is that he was the pick right before Darren Lee, and he was also Rex Ryan's last first-round draft pick. So funny notes on Shaq Lawson. I know, yeah, but that's crazy that they're the same age.
Yeah, so I think that's something to take into account. And Jonathan Marshall, both of these guys aren't good run defenders. They get off the ball quick and they get moved around against the run, but they're good pass rushers, good gap shooters, and I think they could play a little bit of 1 technique, some 3 technique. I just think they have similar skill sets. They go with the younger guy who they just drafted. And Shepard, I think, being a little bit redundant, and I can see him making the team totally. He has good pass rushing skills. 2019, he showed a lot of potential. Having another veteran guy on the team, even in only his 4th season, is worth having around. And it's a position where depth is important. So I can see him making the team. Anytime I say someone's going to get cut, it's never definitive. I could see the other way. This is just my prediction. So I could see him making the team, but I'll go with Marshall. And then Tanzel Smart, I think, I just think he, sort of like Vincent Smith, kind of had too strong of a preseason to really keep him out. I think he showed the get off and snap timing that you really want to see out defensive tackles in this scheme, and makes him a good fit. So I go with those 5.
Your arguments were kind of convincing. Maybe it was a little harsh to say wrong, because I think that is a good. Shepard being 28 or 27, about to be 28 is pretty alarming. And you're right. Tanzel Smart did have a really, really great preseason, and Jonathan Marshall's a draft pick, so it's not beyond the realm of possibility that they could go with 5 and cut Shepard. I just think that Shepard has gotten first team reps. He seems to be a bit of a favorite in the coaching staff. You can kind of always tell in the head coach press conferences whenever they the beat writers ask about a specific unit, and then the coach goes off and starts listing players. This is not always a telltale sign, but sometimes they'll forget certain guys and always bring up certain guys. And Nathan Shepard is a guy that Robert Saleh has brought up every single time he's asked about the defensive line. So I know that he likes him. And I could very easily see them keeping 5 and it being Jonathan Marshall, because he's the guy they drafted, and maybe, he's had a good preseason. He hasn't done anything wrong per se, but the only reason in my eyes that he'd make it is because he was a draft pick. Not that he's bad. It's more just that, okay, well, if he makes it, he's just going to be inactive on game days for the most part. So, I think that Shepard is a guy that would actually contribute. You can stick Marshall probably in the practice squad. But, like Zuniga, he was a draft pick. Maybe there was a team that really loved Marshall. He certainly showed out. I think defensive line is one of those positions where I feel like most teams feel like they have a pretty good defensive line. So, or pretty deep defensive line. So I think they could probably both clear waivers, but, made some convincing points there. I'll stick with the 4 just because I know that this coaching staff loves Nathan Shepard. So
wait, you had 4?
Oh, okay. This bet ended 5 minutes ago, Michael. Come on. All right, linebacker. And this one is interesting because, look, the opposite of defensive line, where it's like, all right, this is a weak spot for the Jets, but they're developing some guys here. Maybe they don't want to carry too many. But look, Robert Saleh does rely on his linebackers. But obviously, C.J. Mosley, Hamza Nasruddin, Blake Cashman, and Jamie Sherwood are all locks. And Jared Davis has to make the initial 53, correct?
Yeah, so he can be placed on injured reserve.
Right. Okay. So Jared Davis also. So that's 5 right there for me. Then after the initial 53, I think they obviously will place Davis on the IR, like you said, and then maybe they bring back. In my eyes, I think Dawkins, as far as the in-house type of guy, would be the first guy they'd bring back. But I also think that is where they're going to add somebody who clears waivers. But as far as the initial 53 goes, I'll have Mosley, Nasruddin, and Sherwood as your starters. Davis is the guy you're going to put on IR, and Blake Cashman is depth. What about you?
Yeah, I have the same 6 guys making it. So obviously, Jared Davis will make the team, so you could put him on injured reserve, and he can come back midway through the season. But if you put a guy in injured reserve before the 53-man roster cut, then he's out for the year. But if he has to make the initial 53 to be eligible to return, so that's why he'll make the team, and then he'll be put on IR, and they could fill a spot with someone else. But I have the same group as you. I think obviously those 4 are locks: Mosley, the 2 rookies, Sherwood and Hamza Nasruddin, and Blake Cashman as well. But this being a 4-3 defense, I feel like they'll probably, and this kind of contradicts my tight end point earlier, but I think they will add a tight end. I think that'll be the first priority once Davis is put on injured reserve with that extra roster spot. But 4-3 defense, I think you need a little bit more than just 4 linebackers if you're going to be running that kind of scheme. So I think that Noah Dawkins comes on as that 5th guy. He was on the unofficial depth chart listed, which even though it was unofficial, it kind of was a pretty good indicator of what they ended up doing throughout the preseason. But he was listed behind Mosley as the second team. I guess you're assuming he's the Mike linebacker behind him, or the positions weren't designated exactly, but he was listed behind Mosley. And he also played the second most special team snaps, third most special team snaps on the team in the preseason. So I think that helps him too. So I believe he will be the 5th linebacker.
All good points there. I think we're probably on the same page for the remainder here, but I'll wait it out. When you go to cornerback, I think, like you said, Dunn was a guy, especially with all the guarantees he got as an undrafted free agent and the first team reps he was getting, a guy that a lot of us assumed would make the initial 53. But yeah, 2 rough preseason games in a row. I think he's a good guy they want to develop, but I don't think he makes it right off the bat. Just not because there's really that many guys better than him. I think this does come down to pedigree because it's so close. I don't see the Jets cutting any of these rookies. If Dunn was, fantastic, then maybe I could see the Jets cutting a rookie, but it's a hard bargain to cut somebody. I mean, I know I said to cut Jonathan Marshall, but you don't really ever want to be cutting rookies. But I think Dunn as an undrafted free agent will get the axe. But yeah, as far as guys they keep, I have Bryce Hall, Bless Austin, MC Squared, Jason Pinnock, Brandon Eccles, Javelin Guidry, and then you have Justin Hardy as a corner special teamer. He's a guy, though, that it seems to be a shoe-in, Hardy, because of his special teams prowess. He was a free agent signing. But if they really had to make room, he's a guy that I could maybe see getting the axe, because you can't there aren't many teams that carry just a pure special teamer. Obviously, there are a few, Matthew Slater being the prime example of it, but that's just something to keep an eye out for. If the Jets have a tough decision to make, I wouldn't necessarily think Hardy's a complete shoe-in. I have him obviously making it. I'm pretty sure you do as well, but just something to keep in mind. But then, I have them putting Dunn in the practice squad. Who are your corners, and how many do you have them keeping?
Yeah, I agree with you on Hardy. I think he's a high likelihood guy to make the roster, because he's a really good special teamer. If there's a guy who, even though Hardy doesn't play defense, you don't want him playing corner, but if there's a guy who's that good at special teams, it's not just his punt coverage, it's his blocking for the return team, everything, then it's justifiable. But, the Jets being a team that is desperate to find some long-term keepers at cornerback, if they really like Dunn that much or whoever else, and they need that space, there is a small chance, but I do think he'll be on the team. So yeah,
that was a Brandt Boyer signing, and I doubt they go back.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously Boyer and this is another reason I think special teams will be key in a lot of these fringe battles. Brandt Boyer is a respected guy in that staff, or else he wouldn't be here through his third regime. So he definitely has a voice, and I think he'll be a lot of special teams guys will get the push for that reason. But with cornerback, I have Bryce Hall, Bless Austin, Brandon Eccles, Jason Pinnock, and Justin Hardy in terms of outside corners, and then Carter II and Guidry in the slot. I think this was a position that seemed muddy and hard to predict for a while, but with Dunn kind of making it clear that he's a best fit for the practice squad in the preseason, I think this looks like a pretty clear position right now.
Sticking with the secondary, let's look at the safeties. Another interesting position, but I'm going to have him keeping four between Joyner, May, Niesman, and Ashton Davis. And Ashton Davis is a guy who hasn't played all offseason. He's a guy that I could see making it and then maybe being put on IR, like you said, with Jared Davis and then bringing him back. But the thing is or they could just leave him on PUP. But if they leave him on PUP, it's just like he can't even practice until week 6. And Salah said he was supposed to be ready by week 2. And I don't think he's going to play week 2. But then he can at least start practicing and kind of get, back, make sure he's still in shape, get used to the scheme a little bit, give him a few weeks, at Florham Park. And then you can stick him out there, maybe post London trip, or, maybe you do wait until week 6 or whatever to bring him out in an actual game. But if we're to believe what Salah said about his injury status a few weeks ago, assuming there's been no setbacks, he should be ready a lot earlier. So I think he will make the initial 53. And I think he might just, stay on the team, from week one, just be a weekly inactive until he's ready to go. He's a guy that I'm really excited to see, because I think, look, like every draft class, you're going to have hits and misses. And I still think you can consider 2020 a good draft class as long as Becton and Hall and, maybe one other guy pans out. You can say that was a very good draft class, even if you're swing and miss on James Morgan and Jabari Zuniga or whatever. But Davis is a guy that some teams had maybe not some teams, because he made it out of there. But reportedly the Jets had a first round grade in Ashton Davis, took him in the 3rd. Obviously there's the whole Marcus May situation, looking at some of the contracts that have been going out there with some of the safeties. I don't think Joe Douglas is going to go to that number. I don't think Marcus May is going to want to be playing on the franchise tag. This could very well be May's last season with the team. You never know, if he could have an amazing season and Douglas meets his number or whatever. But Davis is a guy that, after seeing only in preseason what this Robert Saleh defense does with its safeties, I think he could be a very good fit in it. Just the athleticism he brings and the versatility he brings. So I'm really excited to see him when he's back on the field. But that's just a side note. I think Niesman is a great special teamer and a very competent third safety. And obviously Joyner and May are going to make up your starting duo. Michael, what do you have at safety?
Yeah, I have the same 4. I agree with you. I think it seems like Ashton Davis, initially the return time was pegged to be the 2nd week, but now Vinny Curry's out for the season. So,
well, that was a different situation.
Yeah, a much different situation, but you never know. But if that designation was correct, it seems like there would be no need to put Davis on PUP or injured reserve or anything like that. Just keep him on the 53 and allow him to come back in a couple weeks. And then the other 3 are pretty obvious. May and Joyner are your starters, and Niesman is a very capable backup who is capable of playing a lot of different special teams roles and has shown in Jeff Ulbricht's defense that he is a good backup at safety. I think Niesman really captures what you want your backups to be pretty much at any position. He's obviously not a good player, or else he would be starting, but he's a guy who's come in multiple seasons, played different positions, and produced at about a league average level. And I think that's the most you can hope for when one of your starters go down. So I like Niesman. He's for his role, I think one of my favorite underrated players on the team. So I have the same 4 as you at safety. And just in terms of the starting duo, we didn't get to see much of Joyner throughout the offseason, but he'll be back for week 1. I'm excited to see what those two guys can do. I think there's a lot of potential for that duo between what Joyner did at free safety when he was with the Rams, and then the numbers that and production and big plays that Marcus May has put up the last couple of years. I think there's a lot of potential here, but there obviously are some question marks with, May is playing in a new scheme. The Jets obviously don't value him as highly as the general public does, and there could be probably some reasons for that in terms of on-field production. Joyner is into his 30s, and it's been a few years since he's playing safety full time. So there are question marks, and it will be interesting to see, because I think we thought, at least I did, Bradley McDougald to Marcus May was going to be good last year, and then McDougald just flamed out completely. So it's not always a lock, but there are legitimate reasons to think both these guys can be, top, top tier safeties at their respective positions and form one of the better duos in the league.
Yeah, I like the safety room a lot, and I'm not ready to give up on Davis, and I love Niesman as a depth option. I just really do believe in Davis's potential in this scheme, and I like, like you said, I think we both thought May and McDougald was at least going to be a competent safety duo, and May was more so when he went back to his free safety role. Like you said, McDougald flamed out pretty quickly, but.
And that's another question mark I didn't bring up. If Marcus May is going to be playing more strong safety, I think that's he's clearly better at free safety. Last year he showed that. So that's another thing that we have to find out about.
Definitely. So we'll see how he adjusts to that role. Although it won't be the same role. Yeah. He's not going to be playing the Jamal Adams role, which is what Greg Williams is trying to do. I think the strong safety role in Robert Saleh's defense is a little different. But yeah, this is an underrated room for me. I really like this one, especially once Davis comes back. And then at special teams, obviously Braden Mann and Thomas Hennessy are locks. At kicker, I think we, for a while, thought that the Jets were going to claim somebody here. Jose Borregales is most likely going to get waived in Tampa Bay. He's probably the main guy that you could, if the Jets love him, they could cut Amendola. But Amendola has had a very good preseason. It seems like the Jets really believe in him. They've called his legs special. That's not something that gets thrown around a lot. He's a guy that I think Brandt Boyer and the Jets are really committed to developing. And look, he's been very good in preseason. So I think they hang on to him. I don't think they make any moves there.
Yeah, this was one that seemed like for a long time that there'd be a competition between guys who weren't that proven, and that it seemed fairly likely the Jets would scoop up the best kicker that they could find at the top of the waiver order. But Amendola did nothing but dominate in his role throughout training camp and preseason. Didn't miss a single kick, extra point or field goal in preseason. Kickoffs were good. He has good hang time and placement on those. And then even in training camp, he rarely missed in training camp. I believe he was around 90% in terms of the training camp kicks that were reported. So he did nothing but execute. And when your guy does that, it's hard to move on from that. So it doesn't necessarily guarantee that he'll be good. It's a small sample size. He only, 5 extra points, 4 field goals doesn't guarantee you're going to be 100% kicker for the season. That's like two or 3 games worth. 3 games worth is literally what he did. Right. So it's a small sample, but I think he earned his way onto the team for now. And if your kicker struggles, there's always someone sitting out there in the middle of the season.
Right. Although I think that the Jets are going to be committed to developing him. I mean, look, if he's a complete train wreck like Corey Vedvik was, that's one thing. I think they would just cut him. But I think, it's like every position. Kicker is a little less so because it's so black and white, whether or not you're good at your job or not. It's like, did the ball go through the uprights? There are some other things. Like Amendola clearly has a very powerful and special leg. So like that's I don't want to say a subjective thing to judge, but it may be a little less obvious. But it's like anything. I mean, I think that they are committed to developing him and letting him maybe going through some growing pain, because look, he's going to shank a kick. He's going to miss extra points. He's going to make some mistakes, but what you're looking for what you're wanting to see is, look, that doesn't happen that often. That you see the high ceiling kicks. Maybe they trot him out there for a 57-yarder and he puts it through, stuff like that. And then just because I think kicker is one of those things that's also just so mental, because a lot of guys can kick a 65-yarder with their iPhone, recording at a high school and then upload it to Twitter and everybody goes crazy. But it's another thing to do it in a stadium with 70,000 fans and the games on the line, or, you want Amendola to get that kind of experience. And I think if he gets at least half a season under his belt and he starts to get comfortable, this is a guy that really does have a special leg and could develop into a long-term kicker here. So I think the Jets are going to give him, I don't want to say a long leash, but a good sized leash here. I don't think they're going to just cut him at the first sight of any sort of trouble. I think they will try to let it ride out if he has a game where he misses a few kicks or whatnot.
Yeah, I actually think that's a good point by you, because I think he is a really moldable type of kicker, right, in the sense that, his power is obvious. You can clearly see it. Just the way the ball comes off his foot. They're always high arcing. He doesn't kick line drives that are fluttering through the air. He has clear power. So that type of guy is always moldable. And the accuracy has been there so far, right, obviously. But we'll see going. And look, let's be fair. I believe the 46-yarder he made against the Packers. I forget which game it was.
It was Green Bay, I'm pretty sure.
He barely made that one. He barely stuck it in through the left upright. And you miss one kick out of 4. Now your field goal percentage looks, or out of 5. Now you're 80% instead of 100%, which is a lot different. So that just shows you how small sample sizes work. But I agree with you.
Thank you, Mr. Numbers.
Yeah, I'm good at math. But that just goes to show how, those small samples work. He did his job, but, one kick goes a little bit different. Maybe now we're talking about adding a kicker, but I agree with you, because he has clear talent. And whenever a guy has a leg like that, you want to give him a chance to, find it mentally, to be able to find that consistency, find the form. And because the upside is higher if he can master the accuracy. And now you have a guy who can make 55 yarders, maybe push 60 in certain situations, rather than a guy who just flat out can't do that, who doesn't have the same power. So he is moldable.
And Brandt Boyer is a hell of a special teams coach. I know we've talked about that. And you were very low on Jason Myers when they first signed him. And then Brandt Boyer got a career year out of him. And he's parlayed, Myers has parlayed that into a great career. He's in Seattle. He's doing well. And he kept that trend going. I think he hasn't really had many talented kickers in there. And there are, it's like, the question is like, how much can you coach a kicker? But I think they're doing some things with his technique. I will say, and I don't know if this is just me, but it looks like on his kickoffs that he literally takes like one step and kicks it. I mean, like a lot of kickers have like a huge run up onto their kickoff. He's done a very good job on his kickoffs, but if you watch him, he literally just shows what type of leg he has. He looks like he takes maybe 1.5 steps and then just bombs it, and not just straight through the end zone. He puts some arch on it. They did a few pooch kicks, which I thought worked pretty well with the hang time and the coverage unit, downing the team inside the 25-yard line. But even like you said, kind of that sweet spot of getting right to the middle of the end zone is kind of what he's done a really good job at. So it's not just the kicking; he's done a really good job on kickoffs as well. So I think he's definitely a nice subtle surprise from the preseason. And I guess that's a good place for us to close it. Kind of last topic. I mean, what were some of the best things to come out of this preseason in your eyes? I mean, this is going to come out on Monday, so we're 13 days away from week 1 against Carolina. I cannot wait. You and I are both, well, you're going to the week 1 game against Carolina, but you and I are both going to the home opener. Really excited about this season. Obviously we want the Jets to win, but this is just going to be a fun season regardless, just to evaluate all this talent and see what type of culture they can, try to build on the field. But when you look back on this preseason, like I said, outside of the injuries, I thought this was a really, really good preseason for the Jets.
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously the biggest, most positive thing was Zach Wilson and the way he played, but we've discussed that ad nauseum. So I'll touch on some other stuff. I really like what the slot corners did. Carter II, Javelin Guidry. I think they were probably the 2 best defensive players on the team. Both of those guys just, they were locked down. Carter II, I posted a bunch of clips of his Packers game. He was locking up Amari Rodgers and a few other Packers receivers in that game, and just wasn't getting the ball thrown his way because he was so consistent in coverage. And Guidry's kind of done the same thing. Guidry's been targeted a little bit more, but he made a lot of very good finishes underneath on screenplays and stuff, had a pass breakup, but has done the same thing in coverage. So those 2 guys have been great. And just overall, I think that it wasn't perfect. There were some question marks with the run defense, the pass rush, the second and third team offensive line, but I think a lot of key guys played well and impressed. The first team offensive line was excellent. The receivers played very well. I think the running backs, for the most part, did a nice job. I just mentioned the slot corners. Overall, I think the young corners, save for probably Dunn, save for Dunn, I think showed you a good amount of promise. So I think there were a lot of positive developments at important positions throughout this preseason.
The interesting thing with the corners there, and look, playing slot corner is a completely different position than playing outside corner. But if both those guys, I mean, Robert Saleh said we have two starting slot corners.
Yeah.
And it's like if Bless Austin or Bryce Hall, let's say Bless Austin, because it seems like the Jets are going to try to give Bryce Hall every chance to work it out and become a long-term starting corner. But if Bless Austin is really struggling, or maybe let's say it's November and the Jets have really been hit hard of injuries there, and they're forced to put one of those guys out there, I would be kind of curious to see how one or both of them would fare on the outside, because they've both been just so impressive in the slot. And like, look, Brian Poole was a straight slot corner. And he put up great numbers, but he was never going to play outside. That's the case with most slot corners. That's most likely the case with these two guys, more so Guidry. But I would like to maybe see at some point, if they really are struggling on the outside, to see both on the field at the same time, see what they can do.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this earlier, just to myself. That's what I do going about my day. Could the Jets backup slot corner play outside corner?
Okay, we found the name for this episode.
Yeah, that's a definite attractive title to close the preseason with.
That was the thing with our uploading these podcasts. When Michael uploads it, he puts the most obscure titles of, like, Michael, I know we care about this, but nobody's going to click this, and so that's the running joke of this podcast. And
How many wins will the Jets get from Tanzel Smart's snap timing?
Yeah, it's always. You've gotten a lot better, though. Now we just know, okay, only put Zach Wilson or Robert Saleh, and that's fine.
Does Matt Amendola's kickoff hang time change the future of the Jets?
Exactly. There you go.
But yeah, with the slot corners, I think for Carter II, it's a possibility. I'm not sure about Guidry, but Carter II did play a decent amount of outside corner last year at Duke, 27% of his defensive snaps. And he has really good athleticism that I think could help him with makeup speed on the outside. And I think size-wise, he's probably, he's still a smaller guy. I mean, he's 5'9", 184, but there are smaller guys in the league who played outside corner last year. So I would maybe think about him, but just because of the fact that these two guys are probably, at least based on the preseason, they were their two best corners. I would say Hall's probably better than them for now, although I don't know. He hasn't played enough to really prove that. So if these two guys are your two best corners, do you just let one of them sit on the bench and rot? Or do you, maybe just give them a shot on the outside? So that's an interesting idea to keep in mind.
I think there would have to be some injuries or really struggles at the unit for them to do that, because I think if that was a serious consideration, they probably would have done it more.
It's not ideal.
I think they did give, I don't want to speak out of turn, I think they did give them a few reps outside in this last game. But like you said, we know that Saleh likes the bigger corners, and neither of these guys are huge corners. They're both smaller. But there are plenty of outside corners that are, I think Michael Carter II is listed as 5'10", but you said he's 5'9". But there are starting outside corners that are not, humongous.
5'9" and 5'8". So
okay, so he's adding a little bit there. I do the same thing. It's all right. 5'11" is not a real height. So 5'10", is not a. It's not like we've never seen an outside corner of that height. So if they're both playing well, yeah, I'd certainly like to see it. I think that's something they could play around with, in practice. As far as we went through our 53-man cut downs. Some of the guys to keep an eye out for the practice squad. At least on my end, I think yours is slightly different, but Tanzel Smart, Mike White, James Morgan, Jabari Zuniga, Jeff Smith, Hamilcar Rashed, Jonathan Marshall, Kenny Yeboah, Isaiah Dunn, and I put Lawrence Cage in there as well. So that is, 10 guys right there. It's a 16-person practice squad, so there'll be even more probably returning guys from other teams. So, that is, with all I love the new practice squad rules from last year. The Jets can keep 6 guys who are veterans. They can bring guys up. So that is going to be a valuable little resource for the Jets there. And I think it's a nice place for them to continue to develop some of the younger guys like Zuniga and Morgan, who haven't really impressed so far, but you can keep them on the roster for another season, give them some time to develop. And, they've noted it plenty of times, but those guys didn't have any OTAs or mini camp last year. Those guys, both of them really didn't play that much, and none at all in Morgan's case. Zuniga, this was his first training camp because he was injured all of last training camp. So there is some, they're not necessarily rookies, but, let's just say that I wouldn't call them vets just yet. Right, Michael?
Yeah, except Nathan Shepard.
Nathan Shepard is a full-fledged vet at 28 years old. All right, that is going to – nope.
But I got to talk about the practice squad.
Okay.
I feel like we'll see a good amount of O-linemen on the practice squad. I feel like they have a lot of that caliber.
Yeah, I left all those guys out. My bad. Like Grant Hermans and Tristan.
Yeah, like they have a bunch of undrafted free agents and guys who shouldn't be on the roster, but why not keep them on the practice squad because they're younger. I think Grant Hermans will be. He run blocked pretty well. Most of the backups did not pass block well. Gave up a lot of pressure. And graded poorly in that area, but Hermans was pretty good as a run blocker. I could see him on there.
Jimmy Murray.
Yeah. David Moore, potentially, stash him on there. So those are a few guys I could see on there, and I agree with all the ones you said as well. And I think there will be probably some additions from other teams as well. Maybe they put a kicker on the practice squad, as the pseudo backup to Amendola. That's something they could do as well.
That's a little extreme there. I
don't know. I mean, why not? You got 16 spots.
Well, I think you'd rather develop somebody else. You can just sign a kicker. I think if Amendola is bad, you're not going to find your next starter at that on the practice squad. I think you'd go out and find somebody. But I agree with you there. I think there's definitely going to be a lot of offensive linemen. And then, that is supposed to be Joe Douglas's bread and butter. We know he loves developing them, finding those quote unquote diamond in the roughs. He hasn't really found any yet. I would say I don't think he's really added any that have. I mean, I guess Alex Lewis started for 2 seasons, but so far, I mean, look, like drafting. I mean, I love what he's done with Becton and AVT, and I love the move to bring in Moses, and Fant looks better, and McGovern and Van Roten make up a very competent, solid offensive line. But as far as those, under the radar waiver wire pickups, we haven't really seen too much there. But as we've said, there's a reason they're getting cut. It's the scrap heap. So we'll see if you can find anybody there. But an exciting couple of days here. I think the one thing I've learned from these every single year I've done them is it's never how you expect it, because we're not at practice. You can't see everything. So there will be guys that somebody's going to get cut. I guarantee you somebody will get cut. And everybody's going to freak out, maybe ourselves included.
Who do you think is that
Barrios?
Best candidate for that? Barrios,
he makes a lot of sense. I don't think that Hardy is another one like we just mentioned.
Yeah.
I'm just scanning the roster.
I think Shepard would surprise. I know I brought him up. I think Shepard would surprise people.
I
honestly don't know if I would bet on that. Him being cut, but I do think there are good reasons for it, which I brought up earlier.
And then the other one, and then look, maybe they could cut Coleman or something and try to stash Adams, but I don't know. But the one guy that I don't think will happen, but this has been floated around, and I think I would be kind of mad at if it happened, but Chris Herndon. That's the one guy that people have mentioned, and I know we've shrugged it off, and I don't think it'll happen, but I'll keep it in the back. I don't think they have enough talent there to do that.
Yeah.
Because I think at the very least, it's not like Herndon. I mean, he's not been good, and I wouldn't be comfortable with him as your starter, but it's like, really? You're going to keep him, or you're going to cut him to keep Ryan Griffin and Kenny Yeboah? It's like,
there's a lot of rosters in the league that Chris Herndon probably wouldn't make, but this isn't other rosters. This is probably the thinnest tight end depth chart in the league. So I don't think Griffin has no case over Herndon. He doesn't have more upside, and his floor is lower.
Herndon's turned into a good blocker.
Yeah, and Griffin is honestly not a very good blocker. Herndon's a better player than Griffin, has higher ceilings. There's no case there. And then in terms of Yeboah, we kind of talked about him earlier. He hasn't had a great offseason, and his college tape, I like the addition a lot, but his college numbers overrate him a little bit because he had so many wide open catches and didn't create much of his production by himself. So, I mean, There's more upside just in the sense that you haven't.
Yeah, it's because defenses were focusing on Elijah Moore. So maybe the
Right,
Jets can use
exactly.
that same.
And that's not even an exaggeration. There are actual plays where Yeboah makes catches because Elijah Moore is motioning and guys are following him, and Yeboah's wide open because of it, which is great from Elijah Moore's perspective. But so Yeboah just, I mean, when fans talk about him having more upsides, just because they haven't seen him play, so it's just made up upside just by the fact that he hasn't played yet, but and he hasn't really shown too much either, other than the last game, which was great. But you had to take the whole body of work into account. And Herndon, I think, has had not a great preseason, but there was one play against the Giants, which I posted a clip of, where he won on a seam route for what would have been a touchdown, but Wilson made the right read, the quick read through it to Corey Davis. And he also had a great block on Tyler Croft's second touchdown against Green Bay, which if he didn't make, it wouldn't have been a touchdown. And his pass blocking is good. His run blocking is improving, I think, solid. And he did finish last season strong. It was only 3 games out of a 16-game season where he was ultimately pretty bad. But I think Herndon has shown a lot more capability to make contested catches, win as a route runner than Yeboah did on his college tape or in this preseason in training camp. So, I mean, Yeboah has a case for the practice squad, like you said. Keep him over Griffin if you want, but Chris Herndon should be on this team, I think.
Yeah, and that 2018 season, I think it buys Herndon one more year.
Yeah.
It's funny because we kind of all thought of Herndon as a receiving tight end, and like he still can be. But I think his best asset is his pass blocking.
Yeah,
I think and when you have a 12 personnel offense, you're going to use those tight ends to block a lot. And I think Herndon can fulfill that. I think he has improved as a run blocker. I wouldn't say he's amazing or anything, but he has improved a lot as a blocker. So he's not getting cut, or at least I don't think he will. But look, as we said, you don't get access to all these practices. There are practices that are close to the media. The roster never looks how you think it'll look. So I think there'll be some surprising moves, and obviously they're going to add some guys, and that'll mean guys who we think are safe and will make the initial 53 might get cut. And so, we'll be back on Thursday going over the roster, and then we have we have 3 more podcasts until week 1. So we have Thursday, then next Monday, and then that next Thursday will be the preview pod, and then we're there, Michael. Then we're there. I mean, we made it whole off season. So, oh wow, I cannot believe we went.
You think that went by quick or slow? What was your feeling in the off season?
Quick. About what I would think. I think it was a good off season. So I thoroughly enjoyed this off season, Michael. I don't know about you. I had a good time. I'd love doing our head coach breakdown series.
Yeah.
That was like the most amount of podcasting I've ever done. We did I forget how much. We probably did 16 in 6 days or something. We literally just set up shop and we just record back to back podcasts and upload them on separate days. So that was fun. And
it was like stationing up at one of those, media tours, like the Super Bowl or the draft or something.
Exactly.
It's cool.
And I probably said CEO candidate 80,000 times.
Well, then CEO type guy can command the locker room.
Right. And I love their free agency, their draft.
And they got one. So
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, the free agency, the draft, and obviously preseason has all been pretty good. I think Carl Lawson was really the only negative, I would say, this entire offseason. Outside of that, no, it's been a nice offseason. So it's gone by about what I would expect. But I cannot wait until week 1 against Sam Darnold and the Carolina Panthers. That is just going to be such a crazy game. And look, if the Jets win that game, week 1 against New England is going to be fun. So
yeah,
I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, I have nervous excitement because if they lose, it's gonna be tough for
week 1.
Yeah.
But, week 2, I'm not Bill Belichick has just made a career scaring the hell out of rookie quarterbacks. I hope it's a Mac Jones versus Zach Wilson battle, or maybe I shouldn't because I kind of think he might be a little better than Cam Newton. But obviously he hasn't proven that yet. But week 1 to me is oh, please don't let Robbie Anderson and Sam Darnold and Matt Rule beat us. Just please, can we get this culture on to right, start it off right. But I think week 2, it's if they lose that, especially with the whole Carl Lawson injury and stuff, I won't be as concerned, even though I'm at that game. Week 1 though, please, for the love of God, they need to come through with that.
You just have to enjoy it though. The loss is gonna, and this is completely contradicting what I just said, but it's this is so cool, to be able to get this matchup to start the season. It's poetic Hollywood stuff. So as a sports fan, you just got to kind of enjoy it, like enjoy the spectacle of it. But I'm totally not going to live up to that at all. I'm going to be sleeping in my closet and crying, thinking about Matt Amendola's kickoff hang time.
Yeah.
And how it affected our loss to Sam Darnold.
Well, that'll do it for us. We'll be back on Thursday. You can follow us at CYJ Pod on Twitter, Michael_Nanny, and myself at Ben W. Blessington. Please rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Go to jetsxfactor.com for the best place to go for Jets content. Michael, any last words? What should we call this podcast?
I would say, how does Foley Fadakasi's two-gapping run stuff ability affect Robert Saleh's status as the Jets head coach?
No, then you put Robert Saleh in there, so that's out of the. You have to go with
too attractive.
Yeah, it's too attractive.
We could go with something like, is Thomas Hennessy's long snapping accuracy an underrated problem?
Okay, I don't even know how to respond to that. Everybody have a great week.
He had one high snap, and I forget which game it was, but Brain Man had a good hold to put it down. So
don't disrespect Thomas.
I was making that up. It's not a problem. He's the GOAT.
Okay.
I actually did have one other thing I wanted to say before we wrap this up.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, that was why I give you the last word. So go ahead.
I'm looking at the schedule. Like they do kind of have a really favorable quarterback slate to open the season. The first 8 games, other than Ryan Tannehill and Matt Ryan back to back in weeks 4 and 5, Sam Darnold, Mac Jones or Cam Newton, Teddy Bridgewater. Then there are those 2 games. Then you play New England again. Then you've Joe Burrow, who could have a great second season, but for now, young quarterback, you don't know. And then Carson Wentz, who has struggled the past couple seasons. Again, could be good, but wasn't at all last year. I don't know. They just have kind of a favorable quarterback slate. And after that, it's not even, they play Buffalo twice. They play Tampa Bay, but Miami, don't know what you're getting with Tua. Houston, Tyrod Taylor, not good. Stopgap / low-end starter. Philadelphia, Jalen Hurts, don't know what you're getting with him. Jacksonville with Lawrence, another unknown. A lot of young, unknown quarterbacks on this schedule. So I don't know. That just kind of stood out to me right now that in terms of quarterbacks on their schedule, it's about as favorable of a slate as you could kind of ask for.
Hey, look, I don't think the Jets are going to make the playoffs, but I'm a lot more optimistic on this team than a lot of people. I think if Carl Lawson was healthy, I think we'll look back and say, damn, if Carl Lawson was playing, we did have a real chance to maybe squeak into the playoffs. I think they will hover just below 500 for the majority of the season. I think they'll go trading wins. I think they'll win, they'll lose, they'll win, they'll lose. They'll maybe win 2 in a row, lose 2 in a row. I think it'll be
2013.
It'll be that kind of season, just up and down, up and down, up and down. But even in the downs, even in the games they lose, I think you're kind of hoping for a season like the Chargers just had. Look, they didn't even hover around 500. I think that is actually a very good type of season for the Jets, where it's like they lost a lot of close games and your rookie quarterback looks amazing. So that's pretty much what I would hope for. But I think that they'll hover just below 500. I think Zach Wilson will have a pretty good rookie season with his own up and downs. And I think they'll lose some games that maybe they should have won or lose them in the last minute or whatnot. But, Zach Wilson is the most important thing.
Right. And the Chargers, Chargers come out of that season, the rookie quarterback who they didn't even plan to start. And he has one of the best rookie quarterback seasons ever. So, if you can get that out of your quarterback, if you finish strong, they won 7 games. It wouldn't be fun. The Chargers started 3-9, so that wouldn't be fun to watch, but they won their last 4 games. And that gives you momentum going into next season. And selfishly, I don't want to see a season like that again. That's how 2018 kind of was, although they didn't win at the end of the season. Darnold just played well.
I would like
2019, they finished strong. I want to see them compete and play games that matter and throughout the season. So I would rather see them win 7 games that way, like you described, kind of alternating. So you're in the hunt throughout the season. But either way, if you can come out of the season close to 500 and Zach Wilson plays, shows legitimate promise, builds a good foundation, that's about all you could ask for.
Yeah, 2015 was really the last time I think the Jets. 2017, I guess they were in the hunt. They had that game against New England, was for first place and whatnot. But it was still okay, this is Josh McCown. We knew that the wheels were going to fall off of that eventually. And then it did get to the point where you were cheering for losses and they ended up with the 6th pick. So 2015 was the last time where it was you really were watching meaningful football in late October, which I don't think it's just been a rarity the last few years. So I'd like to see that type of season. But all right, that's enough from us. We'll get out of here. We'll be back on Thursday talking about all the moves that'll happen in the next few days. An exciting week. Everybody have a good one. Go Jets.